Say that again. Say it slower this time, since apparently I don't understand English. Static. A different voice, sharp, cutting through a hallway echo. Sir, please don't touch that panel. That panel is literally malfunctioning because you people can't read a manual. A pause, long enough to feel wrong. Then a third voice, calm, clipped, cutting through both of them like it's been waiting its whole life to say this sentence. He wrote the manual. Silence. The kind that is wait. Somewhere, a fire alarm chirps once and stops. I'm sorry, he what? A folder hits a desk. Paper sliding. Someone reading out loud, disbelieving, tripping over the same 3 words twice. Chief Design Engineer. 6 months earlier, none of that had happened yet. 6 months earlier, Daniel Achebe was standing in a school parking lot at 7:42 in the morning, losing an argument with a Honda Civic that refused to fit into a space clearly built for it. Dad, you're going to hit the curb again. I'm not going to hit the curb. Daniel hit the curb. His daughter, Amara, 10 years old and merciless, didn't even look up from her shoelaces. That's the 3rd time this month. It's a very small space. It's a normal space, Dad. Daniel Achebe put the car in park several inches from where he meant to and let out a breath that had a laugh hiding somewhere inside it. Parallel parking was, by his own repeated admission, the one skill that had never made it across the ocean with him. Everything else, precision, patience, the ability to read a system down to its smallest bolt, had come along just fine. Parking had stayed behind in Lagos, apparently, where nobody parallel parked anything. One day, he told Amara, I will get on the first try, and you will have to admit I am a good driver. I never said you were a bad driver. I said you were bad at parking. Those are different things. They feel the same from where I'm sitting. She grinned at that, the quick, gap-toothed grin she still hadn't grown out of, grabbed her backpack, and was gone before Daniel could get the rest of his sentence out. He watched her disappear through the school doors the way he did every morning, a small ritual he never skipped, never rushed, no matter how tight the schedule. Then he checked his watch, sighed at the Civic's crooked angle against the curb, and drove 11 minutes across town to Crestview Medical Center, where he'd clock in at 8 sharp, put on a gray uniform shirt with Achebe stitched over the pocket, and spend the day being mostly invisible. Crestview was a big hospital. 9 floors, 2 wings, more square footage than most people ever stopped to think about. Daniel thought about it constantly. He couldn't help it. He walked its hallways the way most people walk through their own homes automatically, but with an awareness underneath the surface, a sense for where things were even when he wasn't looking directly at them. The junior maintenance technician badge clipped to his shirt didn't explain any of that. It didn't need to. Nobody asked. Morning, Daniel. That was Priya from the 3rd floor nurses station, the only person on staff who pronounced his last name correctly on the first try, every time without being corrected. Vents rattling again in 314. I'll take a look. You always say that like it's no big deal. It's usually not. He meant that more than she realized. Room 314's vent had been rattling on and off for 2 weeks, a loose baffle knocking gently against the duct seam. Nothing dangerous, nothing urgent, the kind of small imperfection a building develops over years of settling, use, temperature swings. Daniel climbed the stepladder, popped the grill, and reached into the dark rectangle of ductwork with the unhurried confidence of someone who had once drawn the blueprint for that exact duct run, back when it existed only on paper, back when it had his signature at the bottom of the page instead of a work order. He didn't mention that. He never did. 2 years now, since the layoff. 2 years since Halvorsen and Cade, structural engineering the firm, where Daniel had spent 9 years designing the mechanical backbone of buildings, just like this one, announced a restructuring that eliminated 40% of its engineering staff in a single Tuesday morning meeting. Daniel had been in the second wave of cuts. 12 years of experience, 2 U.S. patents in building automation systems, a resume most firms in the state would have fought over in a job market that, at the time, wasn't fighting for anybody. 6 months of interviews that went nowhere. 6 months of savings quietly draining. And a 10-year-old who had just started 4th grade at a school she loved, with friends she loved, in the one stretch of stability Daniel had managed to give her since her mother passed. He hadn't wanted to uproot her. That was the whole decision really distilled down to one sentence. Everything else was details. So when Crestview posted an opening for a maintenance technician, steady hours, decent benefits, walking distance from Amara's school, if you counted 11 minutes of driving as walking distance, which Daniel generously did, he applied. He didn't put the patents on the resume. He didn't mention the firm, or the 9 years, or the fact that he'd once stood in a boardroom presenting the very systems he'd now be tightening bolts on. He just wrote down what the job needed to hear and left the rest out. Nobody asked follow-up questions. His accent did most of the assuming for him. People heard it, made a quiet, unconscious calculation, and moved on. Daniel had gotten used to that particular kind of invisibility a long time ago, not for the first time in his life, and, if he was honest with himself, probably not for the last. He didn't correct it. Correcting it felt like starting a conversation he didn't have the energy to finish, day after day, in a building with 9 floors and 40-some coworkers and absolutely no shortage of small assumptions. He fixed room 314's vent in 11 minutes. Then he moved on to the next work order, and the one after that, the way he always did, quietly, competently, and completely unremarked upon. Fridays were different. Fridays, Daniel left work at 5 on the dot, no exceptions, because Fridays belonged to Amara. The kitchen in their 2-bedroom apartment wasn't big, barely enough counter space to chop an onion without knocking something off the edge, but by 6 o'clock every Friday it smelled like the inside of Daniel's childhood. Tomatoes and red peppers blending down into a rich, deep orange base. Rice going in to soak up every bit of it. A pot of jollof rice made exactly the same way every single week, the way his own mother had made it, the way her mother had made it before that. Same playlist as last week? Amara asked, phone already in hand, thumb hovering. You pick. You always pick. I know. I'm just being polite. You have never once been polite about this. She laughed a real laugh, the kind that made the whole apartment feel bigger than it actually was, and hit play on something loud and completely unfamiliar to Daniel, something with more bass than melody, and he pretended, as he did every week, to be personally offended by her taste in music while stirring the pot with the same wooden spoon he'd owned since before she was born. Grandma's recipe still wins, he told her, tasting a grain of rice off the spoon. You say that every week, too, because it's true every week. This was the part of his life nobody at Crestview knew about, and Daniel liked it that way. Not because he was hiding anything shameful. There was nothing shameful about a father and daughter in a small kitchen, arguing gently about music, keeping a 50-year-old family recipe alive one Friday at a time. He liked it that way because it was his and Amara's. A small, sealed-off piece of the world that had nothing to do with badges or titles or what people assumed when they heard the way he pronounced his own name. Later, after dinner, after Amara had gone through her nightly ritual of doing exactly none of her homework until the very last possible minute, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open to a spreadsheet that had absolutely nothing to do with HVAC systems. Goals, assists, expected goals differentials, tracked meticulously across 3 different leagues. He was, by his own cheerful admission, far too invested in Premier League statistics for a man who had never once set foot in England. It was the one hobby that asked nothing of him except attention, and Daniel gave it freely, updating cells long after Amara had gone to bed, muttering commentary to an empty kitchen about a striker's underperforming finishing rate. It was a small life, a good one mostly, quiet in the ways that mattered, and quiet in a few ways that maybe shouldn't have been if Daniel was being fully honest with himself. The silence around what he used to do, what he still, technically, knew how to do better than almost anyone else who'd ever walked through Crestview's front doors. Nobody at that hospital knew Daniel Achebe held 2 patents. Nobody knew he'd once stood in front of city inspectors and explained, line by line, why a building's entire electrical and climate backbone would hold for the next 50 years. Nobody knew that when Daniel walked those 9 floors with a toolbox in hand, some part of him was still reading the building the way an author reads their own book, recognizing every chapter, every choice, every small correction made along the way. Nobody asked. Nobody needed to. That Friday, driving home with the windows cracked and Amara's terrible playlist still ringing faintly in his ears, Daniel had no idea how much that was about to change or how loudly. Monday morning, Crestview Medical Center's East Wing lost climate control on 3 floors at once. It happened fast. 1 minute the building was humming along the way it always did, and the next, alarms were chirping in the nurse's station, temperature readouts climbing on the wall panel outside the server room, and a low mechanical groan coming from somewhere behind the walls that nobody could quite place. Daniel Achebe heard about it over the radio, clipped his belt, 2 floors down, elbow deep in a leaking pipe joint that had nothing to do with any of it. All available maintenance to East Wing, 3rd floor. We got system fault. He was there in 4 minutes. By the time Daniel arrived, a small crowd had already formed the way crowds do. In hospitals, nurses drifting toward the noise, an orderly pushing an empty gurney nobody needed, 2 administrators standing a careful distance from the wall panel, like it might do something else unpredictable if they got too close. And standing in the middle of it, clipboard in hand, red-faced, and already talking, was Gregory Voss. Gregory Voss ran facilities operations at Crestview. Had for 6 years. He was the kind of manager who said "on my watch" a lot, usually right before something went wrong on his watch, and who treated every fall code like a personal insult directed specifically at him. Achebe. Finally, Gregory didn't look up from the panel. This whole system's down. Server rooms climbing past 80 degrees, and I've got the hospital director breathing down my neck about backup equipment failing. Fix it. Let me look at the panel first. I don't need you to look at it. I need you to fix it. That's the job. Daniel let that pass. He let a lot of things pass these past 2 years. He crouched by the panel, opened it, and started reading not randomly, not the way someone unfamiliar with the system would, scanning for obvious red lights, but methodically tracing a logic tree in his head that had been there in one form or another since the day he designed it. This isn't a mechanical fault, Daniel said, mostly to himself. This is upstream. Somebody changed a set point in the automation controller. English, Achebe. Gregory said it flat, like a joke he'd made 100 times before. A few of the nurses nearby didn't laugh, but they didn't say anything either. Bystanders rarely do in the moment. That's what makes the moment what it is. I'm saying the hardware is fine. Someone reprogrammed the control sequence, probably during the software update last week. Or, Gregory said, louder now, playing to the small crowd that had gathered, the way people sometimes do when they've decided embarrassment is best handled by handing it to someone else. You don't actually know what you're looking at, and you're stalling because you're in over your head. Which, frankly, wouldn't shock me. Somebody near the nurse's station shifted their weight. Didn't say anything. Just shifted. I know exactly what I'm looking at. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, I've got 3 floors overheating, a server room about to fry 6 figures of equipment, and a maintenance tech who wants to talk to me about set points instead of grabbing a wrench. Gregory turned to the small audience, arms spread, inviting them in on the joke. This is what happens when you outsource competence to save $2 an hour. Nobody laughed at that either, but nobody stopped him. That was the part that would come up again later, not the words themselves, but the 11 seconds of silence that followed them. 11 seconds where 4 other people stood close enough to hear, and none of them said a thing. Daniel closed the panel door, quiet, controlled. I need 15 minutes. You've got 5. He didn't get 5. He got interrupted twice, once by a text from Gregory's boss asking for an ETA, once by Gregory himself, hovering, repeating "any day now," under his breath just loud enough to be heard. Daniel worked anyway, found the override sequence, rolled the controller back to the last stable configuration, watched the temperature readout on the server room panel begin, slowly, to fall. 12 minutes. 3 under Gregory's deadline, even with the interruptions. Gregory didn't apologize. Gregory checked the readout, nodded once, and said, "See, that wasn't so hard," like the whole thing had been a training exercise Daniel passed by accident. Daniel packed up his tools and said nothing. He'd gotten good at that. 2 years of practice. What Gregory didn't know, what nobody at Crestview knew, was that the software update from the previous week hadn't just changed a set point. It had changed several, and the pattern of what got changed and when wasn't random. Daniel noticed it that same afternoon, back in the utility closet that doubled as his workspace, staring at logs on an old desktop monitor that most people forgot even had internet access. He noticed it the way he noticed most things, quietly, without announcing it to anyone. The controller updates had been pushed by an outside contractor. A contractor Gregory had personally recommended and personally signed off on, skipping the usual second review step that Crestview's own protocol required for any system touching climate control in patient care areas. Daniel didn't say anything about it. Not yet. He started keeping notes instead. Timestamps, screenshots, a folder saved locally, then backed up to a personal drive, titled Nothing More Dramatic Than HVAC East Wing Reference. The kind of folder nobody would look twice at, if they ever found it at all. Hold on to that folder. We'll come back to it. For 3 weeks, Daniel did his job the way he always did, quietly, competently, unremarked upon. He fixed the vent in 314 a second time, properly, replacing the baffle instead of just resetting it. He nodded when Gregory made comments in meetings. He drove Amara to school, hit the curb twice more, made jollof rice on Friday, let her pick the music, updated his spreadsheet late at night while the apartment slept. But he also kept documenting every fault, every override, every place where the contractor's shortcuts had left small cracks in a system that used to be airtight back when Daniel was the one who built it. There was something else Daniel had tucked away in a drawer at home that nobody at Crestview had ever seen. A manila folder, older, softer at the corners, containing 2 laminated patent certificates and a set of original blueprints with his own signature at the bottom of page 1. He'd pulled that folder out exactly once in the past 2 years, the night after the layoff, alone at the kitchen table, just to remind himself it was real. Keep that folder in mind, too. It matters later. He didn't need either folder yet. He hoped. Honestly, he'd never need them at all. Hope, as it turned out, had an expiration date. It came to a head on a Thursday, 3 weeks after the server room incident, in the same hallway, in front of nearly the same crowd. Another fault. Bigger this time, a full automation failure across 2 floors. Alarms blaring, a patient room losing climate control entirely while a nurse scrambled to move an elderly patient to a stable room down the hall. Gregory Voss arrived, already shouting into his phone, already looking for someone to blame before he'd even confirmed what was wrong. He found Daniel at the panel again, calm, methodical, already 3 steps into diagnosing it. Gregory said, jabbing a finger toward him. This is the 3rd time this month. 3rd time. I don't care what you think you're seeing in there. I need this fixed in the next 10 minutes, or I'm calling the vendor and telling them their tech is a liability. It's not the hardware, Gregory. It's the update your contractor pushed. Don't, Gregory said, voice climbing, drawing eyes from a nurse's station, from 2 passing residents, from an orderly who slowed his gurney to watch. Don't stand there and tell me it's my contractor's fault when you can barely explain what you're doing half the time. You know what your problem is. He didn't wait for an answer. Say that again. Say it slower this time, since apparently I don't understand English. The hallway went quiet in the specific way hallways go quiet when something has crossed a line everyone recognizes but nobody's ready to name out loud. A nurse near the station opened her mouth, then closed it. Priya, from the 3rd floor, was 2 doors down and heard every word, and stood frozen with a chart in her hand, saying nothing. Daniel didn't move, didn't raise his voice. He'd absorbed worse than this quietly for years, but something about the stillness of the hallway, the number of people watching and not speaking, sat differently this time. Sir, please don't touch that panel. One of the junior techs started, seeing Gregory reach for it himself. That panel is literally malfunctioning because you people can't read a manual. Gregory snapped, yanking the panel door open, fumbling with a setting he didn't understand, making it worse. That was the moment the hospital's director, Renata Cole, rounded the corner flagged down minutes earlier by an assistant who'd overheard the shouting from 2 floors up. She stopped, took in the panel, the alarm still sounding, the small crowd, Gregory's hand on a system he had no business touching. What, she said, is going on here? Gregory straightened up fast. Director Cole, I've had a maintenance failure, 3rd one this month, and I'm trying to get some straight answers. He wrote the manual. The voice was Priya's. Calm, clipped, cutting through both of them like it had been waiting its whole life to say exactly that sentence. Renata Cole turned. I'm sorry, he what? Nobody moved for a second. Then Renata Cole did the thing that directors do when they've spent 20 years learning not to guess. She asked a direct question. Mr. Achebe, do you know what's wrong with this system? Yes. Then tell me, in as much detail as you need. Daniel Achebe straightened up, and something in the way he stood shifted, not louder, not different, just fully present in a way the hallway hadn't seen from him before. The automation controller on this floor was reconfigured 3 weeks ago by an outside contractor, without the secondary review your own protocol requires for any system serving patient care areas. I flagged it internally, informally, because I didn't have documentation yet to make it official. I have documentation now. He held up a folder, the one he'd kept for 3 weeks. Timestamps, logs, and the original design specifications for this exact HVAC and electrical backbone, which I have on file because I designed it. The hallway didn't just go quiet. It went still. I'm sorry, Renata said again, slower. You designed this system? 16 years ago, before it was built. I was chief design engineer at Halvorson and Cade. This building's mechanical backbone HVAC, electrical, automation architecture carries my signature on the original blueprints. Daniel reached into the folder and produced the second document, older, laminated at the corners. I hold 2 U.S. patents in the automation systems used throughout this building. I've worked here as a maintenance technician for 2 years. Somewhere behind them, a folder actually did hit a desk and assistant, arriving late with printed personnel records at Renata's earlier request, dropping them in surprise as she caught the tail end of the sentence. Chief Design, she started, reading off the page, tripping over the words. Chief Design Engineer. 2 patents. This says, she looked up, this says you were his supervisor's supervisor, functionally, on paper, before any of us worked here. Gregory Voss had gone very quiet. You knew, Renata said to him. It wasn't a question. I didn't, his resume didn't. His accent did the talking for you. That's what you mean. Renata's voice hadn't risen at all, and somehow that made it worse for Gregory than shouting would have. You called this man incompetent, in front of staff, in front of me, on a system he personally engineered because of how he sounds when he says the word system. A fire alarm chirped once, somewhere down the hall, and stopped a stray signal from the fault Daniel had already, quietly, begun correcting even while the conversation happened around him. What followed moved fast, the way these things do once the truth is finally sitting out in the open where everyone can see it. Crestview's HR department opened a formal review within 48 hours. Priya's account, and 2 other staff members who'd finally found their voice once the silence broke, corroborated the hallway incident almost word for word. Gregory Voss was placed on administrative leave by the end of that week. The internal investigation, once it started pulling threads, kept finding more of them. The unreviewed contractor sign-off. 2 prior safety shortcuts Gregory had approved without the required second signature. A pattern, going back over a year, of decisions made to save time and money at the expense of protocol decisions that had, more than once, put patient care systems at risk without anyone above him knowing. Gregory Voss was terminated within the month. Crestview's board, facing its own liability questions, opened a compliance audit that eventually resulted in the vendor contract being terminated entirely and a new engineering oversight position being created reporting directly to the hospital director. Renata Cole offered that position to Daniel Achebe personally, in her office, without making him ask. Daniel didn't take it right away. He thought about it the way he thought about most big decisions, slowly, carefully, running the numbers the way he once ran load calculations, weighing what it would mean for Amara's schedule, her school, the stability he'd fought 2 years to protect. He said yes 11 days later. His new badge read Senior Systems Engineer. Nobody at Crestview mispronounced his last name after that. A few people who'd never spoken to him in 2 years suddenly found reasons to say good morning in the hallway. Daniel accepted all of it politely and let very little of it change how he moved through his days. Friday came the way it always did. The kitchen still wasn't big. The onions still didn't have much room. But the smell was the same: tomatoes and red peppers cooking down slow, rice waiting its turn, the same wooden spoon in Daniel's hand. Same playlist? Amara asked, phone already out. You pick. You always pick. She grinned, hit play on something with more bass than melody, and Daniel pretended, as he always did, to be personally offended by it. Big week, Amara said, stirring the pot for him while he chopped. Everybody knows now. Does that feel weird? Daniel thought about it honestly, the way he tried to think about everything he told her. A little. Mostly it feels like I don't have to hold my breath anymore. You were holding your breath for 2 years. Something like that. Amara considered that, the way 10-year-olds sometimes consider things far more carefully than adults expect. Grandma's recipe still wins, she said, tasting a grain of rice off the spoon, echoing him without meaning to. It always does, Daniel said. Some things don't need fixing. They're already right. Here's a question worth sitting with. How many people walk past you every single day, carrying more skill, more history, more quiet expertise than you'll ever know, because you never gave them the chance to say it out loud? Daniel Achebe spent 2 years being underestimated by people who never once asked a real question. It took one hallway, one moment of silence broken, for the truth to finally get room to breathe. If this story made you think twice about who you might be underestimating, the person at the front desk, the tech in the hallway, the coworker whose accent you've never really listened past, drop a comment and tell us who came to mind. And if you want more stories like this one, hit subscribe. There's always another Daniel out there, waiting for someone to ask the right question.